Let's start with the first part of the grammar unit, which is relative clauses. Relative clauses give information about something or someone in the main clause. So there are like two different types of relative clause. I want to explain to you this first. Defining relative clauses. Okay. If I say to you something like, the man who lives next door is a doctor, in that sentence, who lives next door is the relative clause. Okay? If I take that relative clause out, I am left with, the man is a doctor. So the problem is that we don't know which man we are talking about. Say, the man, which man? So that means that who lives next door is essential to understand the meaning of that sentence, okay? Because it's not any man, it's just the man who lives next door. So it's important, if we take it out, we don't know which man we are talking about, all right? So those are called defining relative clauses because they define the meaning of the main sentence. Those ones don't have commas. They don't go between commas, right? And in those ones you can substitute which and use that. And you can substitute who and use that too. On the other hand, if I say to you, John, who is a doctor, lives next door, is different because the relative clause is who lives next door. But if I take it out, I'm still left with John is a doctor. So I still know the person I'm talking about. And those ones are called non-defining relative clauses because they don't define the meaning of the main sentence. If you take them out, we still know what we are talking about. And those ones are the ones that go between commas. Why? Because they are an extra explanation, right? They are not essential to understand the rest of the sentence. So remember, those ones are the ones that go between commas, and also in those ones you cannot use that. Okay, so now let's go over the unit a bit. So defining relative clauses contain information which is essential, as I told you. You have those examples here. The man who normally comes to clean our windows is on holiday this month. So you see that is important. Or there's only one clock that works properly in this flat. In that example, we could say which works, but we have decided to use that. So it's okay, yeah? A widow is a woman whose husband has died. Okay, so same thing. Features of defining relative clauses, no commas, as I told you before, and you can use that. A subject for people, you can use who or that. For things, ideas, and animals, which, all right? Who is only for human beings. For the object, for people, who, that, and whom. And for things, ideas, and animals, also which and that. And the possessive is whose, for everyone and everything, right? Whom is more formal than who, that's all, right? Then, sometimes, probably you've noticed that people omit the relative pronoun, people omit that. And you can do that if it is the object of the verb in the relative clause. For example, I am enjoying the book which that you lent me. You could say, I'm enjoying the book you lent me. Because that which and that substitute the book. So it's the object. But the relative pronoun cannot be omitted if it is in the subject of the verb in the relative clause. For example, that's the shop assistant who or that served me the last time I came here. So in that relative clause, who and that substitutes the assistant who served you. So in there you cannot omit it because you need the relative pronoun, because that relative pronoun is the subject of the relative clause. So I hope this is clear. Now we move on to non-defining ones, right? They contain information which is not essential for our understanding of the sentence, right? So, for example, their new house, comma, which has 5 bedrooms and a games room, comma, is much larger than their previous one. So I could say their new house is much larger than their previous one, and it's okay with that. So the clause that goes between commas is just some extra information which is not necessary to understand the whole sentence, right? Or other parties spoke to Mr. Patterson, comma, whose father owned the companies he worked for. So exactly the same. So the features for these ones are commas are required both at the beginning and the end of the sentence, except when the end of the relative clause is also the end of the sentence. So obviously you will have a full stop, right? So, sorry, the subject is who for people, just human beings, and for the rest of the things and animals and ideas is which. Then the object, who and whom, for things which, and the possessive whose for both things, right? And very, very important, in non-defining relative clauses, you cannot use that and pronouns cannot be omitted, right? So please understand this. You could say her maths teacher, comma, who or whom everyone in the class adored, announced that he was leaving the school. Okay? Right. Non-defining relative clauses are more common in written English. Well, that's obvious because, I mean, if you are speaking, you're not going to say comma, right? But, well, makes sense. And which can be used in non-defining relative clause to refer to the whole of the main clause. For example, no one phoned him on his birthday, comma, which made him feel rather depressed. So that which substitutes to the whole fact that nobody phoned him on his birthday, the whole idea. Now, relative clauses and prepositions. Prepositions usually in English come at the end of defining and non-defining relative clauses. We tend to put prepositions in English at the end, like where are you from? That is the person that I work with. They go at the end, so it takes a bit of time to get accustomed to it. In defining relative clauses, the relative pronoun is usually omitted. So, for example, the town I grew up in has changed a lot since I left. So, in this sentence, we have omitted which or that, because we could say the town that I grew up in, or the town which I grew up in, has changed a lot since I left, right? Because it's defining, so we can omit it. In non-defining, the relative pronoun is never omitted. For example, Keith Rolfe, comma, who I used to work with, comma, lives in Paris now, right? So you see, the preposition goes at the end, because if you think in a Spanish way, you will say with who, yeah? But, you know, the most common way to do it is to place the preposition at the end. But, and this might be interesting for you, in more formal English, preposition often come before the relative pronouns whom for people and which for things, in which case the pronoun cannot be omitted. So, I mean, we could do it the Spanish way and place the preposition before the relative pronoun, but there are certain rules that you have to follow to do this. So, for example, we shall be visiting the room in which Turner painted some of his greatest works. Okay, so you can do that with which, but you could not say in that. You could not use that. It has to be which, in which. And if you use who, it's okay, but if you want to place the preposition before the relative pronoun, you have to use whom, right? The head waiter to whom we addressed our complaint was not particularly helpful. So it's not correct to say to who, just say to whom, right? And then we have the relative adverbs, where, when, and why. They can be used in relative clauses after nouns which refers to a place for where, a time for when, or a reason why. So where has the meaning in at which. So in defining, they've booked a week in the campsite where we stayed last year. And one thing, if you use where, you cannot use in, okay? Because if you say, okay, that is the city where I grew up, but it's not correct to say that is the city where I grew up in. You use in if you use which. So referring to a place could be done in two different ways. That is the city where I grew up, or that is the city which I grew up in. So remember this because it's a very common mistake. In non-defining, is in southern hospitals where you were born, okay? Then when has the meaning on, in, which, and can be omitted or replaced by that in only defining. Remember that that can only be used in defining relative clauses, right? So, do you remember the day when we went to Rhyl and it snowed? Yeah, or you could say that we went to Rhyl and it snowed, or you could omit it. Do you remember the day we went to Rhyl and it snowed? And in non-defining, you just have to place when. You cannot omit and you cannot use that. So we're going on holiday in September, comma, when most people are back at work, full stop. Why has the meaning for which and can be omitted or replaced by that in defining relative clauses. The reason why I'm phoning is to ask you for Tina's address, or the reason that I'm phoning, or you just could omit it and say the reason I'm phoning is to ask you for Tina's address. So, summarizing and remember the important things. Defining relative clauses. Essential to understand the meaning of the main clause, right? You don't use commas, and you can use that, and you can omit that. Non-defining relative clauses. They don't define the meaning, so they are not essential. They go between commas, you can take them out, and you cannot use that, and you cannot omit anything in non-defining. Okay, and then the prepositions, right? They tend to go at the end. That is the woman I work with. That is the place I go dancing to. Or they can be placed before the relative pronoun, but there are certain rules. If you use who, has to be whom. So that is the woman with whom I work. Right? And you cannot use that. You cannot say that is the woman with that I work. You have to say with whom I work. And the same thing for which also. Right? Then the adverbs like where. Okay, you can use just where on its own. That is the restaurant where we ate yesterday. But no where we ate in. You don't combine the preposition and where. You only use where. Or you could say that is the restaurant which we ate in. So that will be okay, or at. Right? It's the same with when. Okay? I remember the day when I met you. Okay? But you could also say I remember the day which I met you on, because on is for dates, is for days. So there are like two ways. And finally, why? Just to say the reason. You know, She is the reason why he is so sad. And that's it about relative clauses. Now we are going to the second part of the unit, which is like the causative, with have and get. Well, in Spanish, if we want to say that maybe our house has been painted, we will say something like pinté la casa la semana pasada. And we don't really know if you painted the house yourself or you paid someone else to paint it for you. But in English, it's different, right? If you do any kind of service or anything for yourself and you do it yourself, you do it in an active way. So if I say in English, I cut my hair last week, that means that I did it myself. But if you get someone else to do it for you, you have to use the structure have something done. And it's a bit complicated because, you know, the order is a bit confusing. So remember that it's like have something done. So if you have to change the tense, you change the tense with the part of the have. For example, I have, or I am having, or I will have, or I am going to have, or I have had, or I could have. And then something done stays exactly the same. So, for example, if I want to tell you about different services I paid or I got other people to do for me, right? I will use I had, past, something done. So, for example, last month I had my computer repaired, or I had my house painted, or I had my accounts done, right? Or if you want to make it future, like plans, you say, okay, next month I am going to have a new bathroom installed, or next month I am going to have my car serviced. So that means you're going to, you know, call contractors to install a new bathroom in your house, or you're going to take your car to the garage and pay the mechanics to service it for you. And remember, is have something done. Something done stays the same. So the structure is have something done or get something done, right? Which is a bit more informal. Indicates that the action is done for the subject by someone else and not by the subject. So compare. I repainted the windows. I did it myself. Or I have the windows repainted. Someone did it for me. Get can be used instead of have in this structure. Where did you get your photos developed? Instead of where did you have? And all tenses of have and get are possible. We've just had our washing machine repaired. I'm getting my hair done tomorrow. Okay, so that part of have and get can be done in all the tenses, and something done remains exactly the same. So remember, I will have, I am going to have, I am having, I have had, I could have something done. And also this structure is used for events usually unpleasant, which are outside of the speaker's control. John had his car stolen last week. Yeah, because we don't know who did it, obviously. So I have my wallet stolen, and this structure is also used for that. And this is the end of the lesson, and thanks for listening and have a very nice day. Bye.